Hey everyone, Daniel here. Welcome to part 2 of the LS Swap instructional video series. In part 1, we went over engine selection, and in this episode, we're going to go over all the parts that go on the engine. So, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get right into it. So there's quite a number of parts we need. Some of them are mandatory. Regardless of where you got your engine, you're going to have to buy a couple aftermarket parts. And the rest of these parts may already be on your engine if you bought a used engine. All of this could be included. So let's go over everything from right to left. Let's talk about the oil pan first. We are going to need to use a low profile oil pan because we have a clearance issue where the differential could hit the oil pan when it bottoms out. So not only do we need to mount the LS engine as high as possible and off to the driver's side, we need to use the lowest profile oil pan on the market, and that is the Holley 302-5. However, there's an Amazon eBay replica of the 302-5, and that's what I have here. I wanted to try it out to see what the quality looks like and how the fit is and compare it with the Holley one. I have the Holley oil pan installed in my first LS swap, the golden one, and I demonstrated that in the making of series. So for this series, I'm going to go with the inexpensive, low profile replica of the Holley oil pan. It comes with all the hardware you need and a pickup tube. However, you notice it does not come with a windage tray, so you will have to buy that separately. In my case, my crate engine came with an oil pan, and if you have a used engine, it probably came with an oil pan too. And there's probably a windage tray in there. The stock windage tray for this engine will work. You will, however, have to cut the windage tray because this is so low profile that it will hit the windage tray unless you trim it down. So we'll go over that later. So that's the oil pan. The next part that you will have to buy is low profile exhaust manifolds. Right here I've got the Holley rear dump, they're called. And these, I think, will line up as close as possible to where the stock Land Rover Y pipe ends up. So it'll be as close as possible to the original Rover exhaust manifolds. However, these are kind of pricey, so there are some more budget options if you need them, and you can consult our parts list for those options. There's some from Summit Racing that dump even further back. Those will require a little bit more welding to adapt the exhaust pipes, but they still work. These Holley exhaust manifolds did not come with gaskets, so you will have to get new gaskets unless you got a crate engine like I did, which came with a box full of gaskets, including exhaust manifold gaskets. Next is a Corvette power steering pump and pulley sold separately. So we're going with a stock 2006 Corvette power steering pump because it fits the Land Rover perfectly. This fitting here is the same 12mm fitting that comes out of the Land Rover power steering cooler. So this just threads right in, and this fits the rubber hose perfectly. So the Corvette power steering pump is a direct fit to our Land Rover, so we're going to get that and a pulley. For the fuel lines, you will also want a 1-foot AN hose with a female 3/8 push connector for fuel and a male 5/16 fuel connector. Altogether, you end up with something like this. This side will plug into the Rover's fuel line, and this side will plug into the LS. Of course, if you prefer to make your own fuel line all the way from the fuel tank, you can go do that, but this is the simplest and quickest way. Here's a visual of how that goes. Make sure that's clicked in properly, and this will click into the GM fuel rail. And it's entirely up to you if you prefer to just replace the fitting with a barbed AN fitting or something to make it more streamlined. This is just the quickest way. Another part you'll need to get is this. This is a simple adapter from ICT Billet that will allow us to thread the original Land Rover oil pressure sensor into the oil pressure sensor port of the LS. This will allow us to have a working oil pressure light on the dash. As I mentioned before, there's no need to mess with any of the power steering plumbing because the Corvette pump fits right in. You might be wondering about transmission cooling lines. I'm gonna see if we might be able to keep those intact since we are keeping the bell housing intact. So we're gonna tackle that as we go in this video series. Worst comes to worst, we may have to replace a section of the transmission cooler lines with some AN lines, custom made. Finally, the last thing you might need is some heater hose. You will need some 3/4 and 5/8 heater hose for the heater core. So the best place to get that is actually your local auto parts store. You can buy maybe like 3 feet of it, cut to length, and that's going to be the cheapest place to get that. But I will put some links in the spreadsheets if you want to buy them online. So that's pretty much it for all the parts that everyone will have to buy regardless of which engine they got. The rest of the parts I'm about to show you, if you bought a used engine, it probably came included with the engine, already mounted on there, with a couple exceptions. If the engine you bought used is not drive-by cable, then you will have to buy a drive-by cable throttle body from eBay or somewhere, and a drive-by cable PCM computer. But if the engine you bought is like from a 2001 Silverado and it's a LM7, I think from 1999 to 2002, you can get a drive-by cable setup. So if your engine is drive-by cable, yeah, make sure you keep your throttle body and make sure you also buy the PCM with it. The best PCM is the one that came with the engine, as long as it's drive-by cable. Before we get into the rest of these parts, one important thing. I recommend you buy your wiring harness before buying any of these other parts and sensors, because the wiring harness will come in instructions. And in the instructions, there will be a list of compatible parts for your engine harness, especially the O2 sensors. Depending on the brand of wiring harness you get, they'll recommend different O2 sensors and maybe some other sensors. So make sure you have this list before you start buying all new sensors. So let's go over these extra parts. Because we bought a crate engine, we have to buy everything. So I got coils for Gen 3 5.3 ignition coils. I got these on eBay. Even came with an extra one. Pretty awesome. New water pump. Obviously you can use the one that came with your engine, but I think it's always a good idea to get new and replace these. The thermostat usually is sold separately, so I got one of those. I think this is a 185. Harmonic balancer. This should definitely already be installed in the used engine, but if you're buying a crate engine like us, you'll need the new harmonic balancer and bolts. Pretty inexpensive though. Back here, new spark plug wires, highly recommended. New spark plugs, also highly recommended. I recommend new O2 sensors. The wiring harness recommends AFS 138, so 2 of those. In some strict emissions areas, you may need 4 oxygen sensors. We've got a new cam sensor. You can reuse the one on your engine, although the cam sensor is kind of hard to reach. It's like all the way back here. So maybe it's just a nice thing to replace for peace of mind so you don't have to go and dig through. Same with the NOx sensors. The NOx sensors are kind of a pain to replace because they are here in the valley. So I recommend replacing those because they are often very rusty and don't look very good. And get new wires too, because the wires get super crusty from all the heat. What else? I've got a evap purge valve because I'm going to try to restore the evap functionality. LS coolant temperature sensor, LS map sensor, MAP. You can use the one that came with your engine. Same with the MAF sensor. Use the one that came with your engine, or in my case, I had to buy a new one. This is a crank sensor for Gen 3. Goes over here by the starter. Over here I have a steam crossover pipe and block off. So on the used engine, this will definitely come installed. You should see a crossover pipe going this way, and the rear ones should be blocked off. But on this crate engine, it didn't come included, and I found that the least expensive option is to buy aftermarket from Summit Racing. So I did that. I need an oil filler neck and cap, a dipstick, alternator. You can use the one that came with your engine. You can buy a new one. You can upgrade to a higher output one. There's lots of options for LS engines. A drive-by cable PCM. It needs to say blue and red. The red blue ones are drive-by cable and are compatible with drive-by cable throttle body. This one is from eBay. Next up, injectors. I also got these used. And fuel rail. So the fuel rail is these two rails and the pipe that goes across. Ideally, you would get a returnless fuel rail. It only has one connector here. I think those were in 2005 plus vehicles. You can definitely buy that separately. You can basically buy one of these that only has one hole, and then you just get rid of this part. But it's not totally required because we can just block off this pipe. I'll show you that in the future video. Intake manifold. I bought a brand new truck intake manifold. This is the same intake manifold you would get on the used LM7, LM4. Believe it or not, this truck manifold is one of the best performing intake manifolds for a Gen 3 LS. So there's a lot of aftermarket ones that are nice and smooth and shiny, but you lose about 10 to 15 horsepower with those. So I recommend sticking with truck intake, especially because our throttle cable is going to mount to one of these bolts. So that's convenient. You do not need an AC compressor because we will reuse the Land Rover AC compressor with our custom mounts. This means you can just put the Land Rover AC compressor off to the side. You don't have to disconnect any refrigerant lines and deal with refrigerant. We'll just put it right back and your AC will work perfectly. If you are following in my footsteps with a crate engine, make sure you're building a stock engine and buying all stock parts for a vehicle that would have this engine in it, right? Because you don't want to accidentally make too much power, ruin your transmission. Make sure you're sticking with stock components and stock performance. An easy way to make sure of that is to have a reference vehicle in mind when shopping for parts. For example, with my LM7, I could say, oh, I want to build this exactly like a 2001 Suburban, right? 2001 Chevy Suburban 1500. Okay, with a 5.3. Okay, and then any parts that are listed here are going to be stock parts for that vehicle. Say you have an LM4 aluminum engine, then maybe your reference vehicle is a 2003 GMC Envoy XL, 2003 Envoy with a 5.3, right? And that is going to be parts for an LM4. So that's pretty much all of the parts you need to dress up this engine. These are super simple engines, and you know, less parts, less failure points, and that's one of the things I love about them. Let's focus in on the fuel rail for a minute, because we talked about adapting it to the Rover side with this hose, and it clicks right there. But this LM7 fuel rail also has a fuel return. This, in those vehicles, there'd be a return line that goes all the way back to the fuel tank. You do not have to create a return line on the Discovery. The Discovery is a returnless system. You can keep that the same way with a couple of options. One very simple option, you can buy an AN fitting that goes over here, I think a 5/16 female, and an AN plug, and plug this up. Click, and it's plugged. Done. Or you can buy another driver's side fuel rail that is returnless. I think from a 2005 plus vehicle, they made these returnless, and it just has one hole here. So then you can just unscrew and remove this little return line fitting, and you're done. So those are two ways. The part number for the returnless fuel rail, 2171542. That's the OEM part number. Or AC Delco 126021113. $72. You can get a returnless fuel rail on the driver's side. Otherwise, you can get a 6AN plug like this. And you can get a 6AN quick disconnect fitting that fits 5/16 SAE. Okay, now for the rest of the video, I'm going to demonstrate the engine build. I'm going to put all of these parts on my engine, starting with the aftermarket parts, oil pan and exhaust manifold that every build is going to need. And then I will install all the OEM parts. So that way, if you have a used engine with all those parts already installed, you can skip the latter half of the video. Now, this oil pan didn't come with any instructions, but thankfully, the equivalent Holley oil pan has instructions online, so we can follow those. Just look for Holley 302-3, and you'll find the PDF link to the instructions in their product listing down here. Instructions also have recommended windage tray part numbers, as well as dipstick and dipstick tube part numbers. First order of business, this oil pan came with drain back holes on either side and some plugs. So I'm going to install the plugs with some thread sealant. New oil pan uses a different pickup tube, so we're going to remove that too. See, so test fitting the no oil pan, you can see that it does not sit flush. It is because of the windage tray hitting this area. So we're going to have to cut the windage tray according to the Holley oil pan instructions. So there's my Sharpie drawing of the cut line based on the instructions. Make sure you get the orientation right. Dipstick clearance is there. So this is the underside of the windage tray. This is the side that faces the engine. There's the dipstick clearance. And there's my line. So now I'm going to take an angle grinder or a Dremel or whatever and cut along that line. Like that. So now I can come in and make these cuts. Okay, finished the rest of my cut except this corner right here, which I might just grab it with some pliers and just bend it. Done deal. Here's a finished cut. Now I'm going to take a file and file all the edges smooth. Okay, once you're done filing, this is going to be absolutely caked in metal dust. So you need to rinse it thoroughly with some brake cleaner. And then after that, maybe you want to spray a little WD-40 on it so it doesn't rust. Okay, finished cutting my windage tray. Happy with it. So now I'm going to reinstall the front two bolts holes are no longer used. Before I bolt it down, I'm going to do a dry fit of the oil pan, make sure it doesn't hit anymore. Okay, that's good. Okay, oil pickup tube. I would put a little bit of clean oil on this gasket before inserting it. Okay, next we want to torque all the bolts. The window tray nuts are torqued to 18 foot-pounds. There's one nut I can't really get to, so I'm just going to do my best using a wrench. Now, the little bolts here, torqued to 106 inch-pounds. It's about 8.9 foot-pounds, by the way. Ooh, that one's tough to reach. Now, one of the two bolts here is really tough to reach. You ideally need an extended Allen wrench to get there. I'm gonna do my best using this hand wrench. So I'm not gonna install the new gasket and oil pan fully yet. So normally you put in the new gasket, you have to put some RTV on the four corners where the front and back covers meet the engine. But all I'm gonna do for now is put this on, and I'm gonna hold it in place with just a couple of bolts, just to protect the area. Because what we're gonna do is, after we put the engine in the car, I want to drop that oil pan so I can very easily access the flex plates to torque converter bolts. And once those are in, then I will permanently install the oil pan with the new gasket, with the RTV, everything torqued, right, at the end. So for now, just 2 bolts and we're done. Make sure your oil pan is not hitting the back of your windage tray. There's some play in it. Make sure it's stuck all the way that way. I was having an issue where the oil pan was sticking out a little bit this way. So you don't want that. Got my 2 bolts into the oil pan. Now moving on to the exhaust manifolds. You will need your exhaust manifolds. Make sure you identify the left and the right. You want the output to be in the back of the engine. 2 exhaust manifold gaskets. These came with my crate engine. And the bolts included with manifolds, which are... oh wow. So to my great surprise, the exhaust manifolds did not come with any manifold bolts. Whoops. So I'll make sure to add that to the parts list. Came with a hardware kit that's nice. It's exhaust gaskets and a flange for you to weld to your exhaust pipes that matches the manifold, and some bolts. So that's good. But no manifold to engine bolts. Luckily, I have plenty of M8 bolts laying around. These are M8 by 25 millimeters long. Install is very straightforward. We get a gasket, we get a manifold, we put the bolts in, and then we torque them to spec. Both gaskets are the same, although there is a right and wrong way. You'll know because the holes will line up. There are 2 holes on the gasket that are meant to hold the bolts in. So use those holes first. Line up your gasket with your manifolds. Put the bolts in, and the bolts will help hold the gasket in place. Then use those same bolts to I will loosely put these bolts in. And then the rest of them, there's 6 on each side. Now, when torquing these, you want to torque the 2 center ones first, and then alternate on your way to the outside. We're going to torque in 2 passes. The first pass is going to be 89 inch-pounds. 89 inch-pounds, here you go. The second pass is going to be 15 foot-pounds. maybe not a bad idea to recheck the torque after you've driven your engine a few miles and it's had a chance to heat up and cool down. Now we just repeat on the other side. Okay, finally the last custom part we need to install is this ICT billet adapter. This is going to allow us to install the Rover oil pressure sensor on here. So take the cap out. We're going to use a crush washer. This is kind of like the washer you would use on your oil pan drain. And we're going to snug it up until we crush that washer a little bit to get a nice seal on it. Now you can install the Rover oil pressure sensor here. I haven't pulled my Rover engine yet, but if I did, I would put that there now. So add that to your to-do list if you can't do it yet. Now I'm going to move on to the rest of the parts. Let's start with the crank pulley and new crank pulley bolts. In the used engine, this will already be installed, of course. So we'll set that in like that. And now we need to use a crank pulley installer tool. So like this harmonic balancer pulley installer. This is not an engine specific tool. It's just for installing harmonic balancers in general. And it has multiple thread pitches for all the different engines. Basically, you pick your rod. I think this is the one that fits there. You thread it in. Then you take this doohickey, thread that into the rod. Alright. And then we're going to turn the doohickey until our pulley is fully in. And before you totally press it in, put a little grease, silicone grease or a little oil on the front seal so it goes in easier without damaging the seal. The doohickey is a 32 millimeter, so I need to use a big wrench and just go at it like that. Okay, once you feel resistance and like you're turning the crank, that's it, you're done. Now you untighten the doohickey and remove it with just a stud too. With the pulley fully on, let's thread in the bolts. Now we have to torque this bolt. It's a 24 millimeter head. You need to torque it to 37 foot-pounds. Easy enough. And then turn it an additional 140 degrees. If you have a way to measure degrees, great. I'm going to search my shop to see if I have one of those. But if I don't, I'm going to do my best to eyeball it. Maybe I'll make some marks and then another one at 140 and then go and do that way. So 37 foot-pounds. 37. You will get to a point where you won't be able to torque this the extra 140 degrees without someone holding the other side of the engine. We might want to do the final torque when we have the flex plate on so that we can have someone hold the flex plate for us with a wrench while we torque this the additional 140 degrees. Maybe keep a running to-do list of things that you need to do at later stages, like torque this to 140. I would also give the engine a full revolution to make sure that you don't have any issues with it hitting your oil pan and your modified windage tray, right? So you don't forget to do that later. Okay, next, why not install the oil pump? Our new AC Delco oil pump came with 2 gaskets. Water pump does not come with bolts, but if you have M8 by 80 bolts sitting around like I do, you can use that. Okay, just taking a look at my water pump, figuring out where the gaskets go. Okay, looks like both gaskets are identical, just flipped. Okay, with my gaskets precariously balanced, Okay, at least I got one sided. The other side, maybe I can just get away with sliding it in there. So to torque your water pump, there are two passes. On the first pass, you're going to set your torque wrench to 11 foot-pounds, and on the second pass, 22. There's also a torque sequence. You're going to start with the center bolts on both sides, and then you're trying to do a star pattern. So center on both sides, then bottom left, top right, top left, bottom right, and then repeat for the second sequence. So let's start with the 11 foot-pounds. Great. Now moving on to 22 foot-pounds. The thermostat and thermostat housing are often sold separately, so make sure it's installed and gasketed properly to the instructions. Sometimes it'll say use an O-ring gasket with this style, but there's another style where they want you to use a paper gasket. So make sure you do it correctly. Set it in there and get the bolts. Now these water inlet bolts are torqued to 11 foot-pounds. So here's the Summit Racing kit I'm using. This is in the parts list. We got block-off ports for the rear and the crossover tube for the front. Start with the rear, easier, right? Just the block-off ports. Okay, rear of the engine. We've got the two block-off plates with a little O-ring that goes on it. Stick that in there. Add the bolts. Easy peasy. So it comes with two adapters. I'm going to put the adapters in. Just bolt them down loosely to keep them in place. Okay. Because this tube uses a pipe thread, we want to put a few rounds of Teflon tape on it. Okay, I'm going to start by threading the tube in manually just to make sure I don't cross thread it. I'm going to go until it feels pretty good and tight. If you end up bottoming out, maybe you need to take it out and add more Teflon tape. Okay, that's quite snug, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to unbolt the adapter on the driver's side again, so I don't twist the hose when I thread it to the other side. Once again, I'm going to start hand threading in here. Okay, I'm keeping in mind that at the end, I need both sides to sit flat. So as I'm tightening this, I'm going to kind of feel how close I am to being fully tight and making sure that I don't go too far and not be able to sit this flat. So let's see. You can tighten either of the two sides to make this work. So you can leave this one a little bit loose to help with that. So I feel like I can go one more turn. So let's go for it. Oh, I hope I wasn't wrong. Nope, I think that was good. Went for one more turn, and I think this is good. I don't believe I could go for any more turns on either side, so just gonna snug it. Yep. Excellent. We have this little barbed fitting that we need to put here. It needs some Teflon tape first. And that's going to lead to a small coolant hose that's going to go back to our coolant reservoir. And on the stock engine, that coolant port will be here, pointing this way. You'll have a little port coming out like this. Done with the steam ports. I'm not doing this in any particular order, so why not put in the spark plugs next? You're going to find a lot of online debates on should you use anti-seize on spark plug threads. Back in some older vehicles, perhaps, it was indicated. But on modern spark plugs, you're not supposed to use anti-seize. It can have a torque multiplying effect, and you end up damaging the spark plug. So it's not needed. We're going to put these in and torque to just 11 foot-pounds. Now torquing to 11 foot-pounds. And that's it. Now repeat on the other side. Since we just installed spark plugs, why not continue on and install our coils? So those bolts on here with M6 bolts. If you're buying your coils separately, well, make sure you're getting stock ones if you're building a stock engine, which I recommend. And you'll need a coil bracket and a little wiring harness that goes on it. So with the coils on, the natural next step is to get your new spark plug wires and hook them up. If you buy a used engine, originally they have a heat shield on the boot that goes near the exhaust manifold. So I might pick some up, and I recommend doing the same. It's probably a good idea. Cool. And repeat exactly the same on the other side. Next, still in no particular order, I'm going to install a new camshaft sensor. It comes with some high temperature lubricant, which is indicated that you should put some on the O-ring to prevent it from pinching or getting damaged on the way in. And we need a bolt for here. Looks like an M8. Still in no particular order, the GM crankshaft position sensor goes here. Also, high temp lube is indicated to go on the O-ring. And we need an M8 bolt to hold that there. I don't think you need a tutorial for this, but oil filler neck goes in and cap. Coolant temperature sensor, the GM one, goes on the driver's side head right there, and it has a copper crush washer, so I don't think we need any kind of sealant there. So with a 19mm wrench, snug it up until it feels like you're crushing that washer, but don't go crazy. These are aluminum threads. You don't want to strip that. Trust me. That was a driver's side head. On the passenger side head, there's also a coolant temperature sensor port right here on the back. We're going to use that to install the Rover coolant temperature sensor. It should thread right in there. So you remove this plug and put your Rover one in. But because I haven't pulled my Rover engine yet, I'm going to have to do this later. Add it to the to-do list. Okay, knock sensors, which I highly recommend buying new with a set of wires. Sometimes they come together as a kit. Knock sensors often are rusty and in bad shape So that's why I recommend replacing them. They're hard to get to, so you might as well do it now. Stick them in, and I'll thread them in by hand first. With a 20mm socket, torque to 15 foot-pounds. It's important to get the torque right because these are very sensitive, and if you over torque them, they will read wrong. So make sure you get it right. Now for the wires, which you bought new. Let's see, it's pretty obvious which one goes where because the wires go back this way. So the blue one is the front one. So we'll connect that. Connect the green. Now there's an advisory from GM to seal this by, I think they recommend putting this in, then making a dam with RTV. Some people put RTV on this seal just to make sure it's really, really snug. But this is a very snug seal. I don't think it's necessary, but I will do the silicone dam around it as advised. Oh boy, these are tight. Okay. Okay, that was my attempt at making the dam. I saw people were leaving a gap in the rear, so I'm going to do the same and call it good. Alright, this is starting to look like an engine, and I'm running out of things on my workbench. So the intake is still here, but I'm not actually going to put on the intake because I like to use these bolts to lift the engine into the vehicle. So I need the intake out of the way, especially to get to the bell housing bolts and everything. So the intake is not happening yet. However, I will get my intake ready. I could bolt the throttle body to it. Not going to gain much by doing that. I could install the fuel rail onto it and fuel injectors. I'm now assembling my fuel rails with fuel injectors. When doing so, it's a good idea to replace the two O-rings, the fat one up top and the skinny one that goes into here. So if you bought a crate engine like I did, it came with a gasket kit including new injector O-rings, so you don't have to go and buy those. Be very careful when removing the O-rings not to damage the injector itself. The clips, so the plug on the injector is opposite of these tabs. Then the clips come in from the back, and make sure that they slot in like that. Okay. Another thing you should know, you can send injectors out to get cleaned and checked. That's an online service. You can get that done. Might be worth it. If you did not get a crate engine, but you did get a new intake manifold, those also come with new injector gaskets, O-rings. Okay, now to install the fuel rail onto the intake, the one with the regulator goes on this side. There's a throttle body. You just press it in. Install screws, repeat on the other side. Before installing that crossover tube, make sure you got O-rings in there. Unfortunately, my gasket set did not come with replacements for those. You're going to want to loosen the screws that are holding the rails and remove this one because there's a bracket there that uses it. With the tubes in, put the retaining brackets back in, the screws back in, and we're done. The intake is ready. Okay, now evap. The evap purge valve usually goes here. If you're not doing evap on your vehicle, you can buy a block-off plate. If you are, you want to put an evap purge valve, this is going to be too tall. So there is an evap relocation kit that I can add to the parts list and link below. And then you'll just have your valve sitting kind of like there or something. Since we are not going to reuse the fuel return line, we're going to block it off here. You don't have to hook up the regulator. You can leave this plugged. You can put a little plug on the regulator and just forget about it. Finally, let's talk map sensor. If you have an original intake that came with a used engine, the map sensor will probably go here. And that's fine, except the engine is a little bit high up, and the plug for the map sensor will maybe hit the windshield cowl of your Discovery. So you might have to break off the clips and rotate it this way, which is totally fine. However, this is an aftermarket intake, and it's been improved and reinforced in certain areas to prevent warping. But also one of the differences is they moved the map sensor back here, which is super convenient for us. All we have to do is press it in, just like that, and now it's in, and it'll just plug in, just like that. Fantastic. Oh yeah, and don't forget to put one of these screws with a washer in there to hold the map sensor. Alrighty, I think the intake is ready enough for now. This is where the brake booster vacuum line will go. We could install the throttle body here, but I might just do that later. The hardware kit came with some studs. You're supposed to put 3 studs here, here, and here. Put your throttle body on, and then use these nuts to hold it, and torque to 89 inch-pounds. But that's pretty much it. Alright, so that concludes our video. The engine is looking nearly ready. In the next couple of videos, we're going to install the accessory brackets and remove the Rover engine. So stay tuned for that. The fun is about to begin. Thanks for watching.